everybody. Welcome to the Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge podcast. I'm Michael Bott.
And I'm Rupert Soskin. Welcome.
The Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge podcast. I don't know, if you're used to the rest of our channel, we probably find ourselves doing things about things, you know, that we're reporting on news or even making films. The Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge podcast is a place where we think there might be some value in us just chewing the fat and pondering issues that have come up from stuff we've learnt over, through the Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge project. So there's a much more sort of conceptual and philosophical bent to what we do with this podcast. So apologies if pictures and illustrations and maps or things, those won't be popping up. So we've got other stuff on the channel for that.
Yes.
But so to the point of today's conversation, this one, places of pilgrimage. That's what I'm calling it anyway. And it was inspired by a paper or an article that you came across, Rupert, which is from way, way, way back. You know, this is
it is
right in deep time, isn't it?
It's Lower Paleolithic. We're going back hundreds of thousands of years, and it's fascinating the way this connects, really. And basically, a team of researchers from Tel Aviv University have been researching a couple of areas in Upper Galilee. And they've been researching here for 20 years-ish. And basically, the question arose because they found rock outcrops where the stone was good for tool making, and there was evidence that stone tools had been made at this site forever. But just a little way over there, there's more rocky outcrops of the same rock, perfectly good for stone for tool making, but no signs of people doing anything there at all.
What sort of dates are we talking about? How many eons ago were we talking here?
Well, we're talking about so Lower Paleolithic and forward. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years ago to begin with, and then people using the same site, for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that makes it interesting, because the idea of the research was to find out why people were using this site and not these other sites that were nearby. And what analysis of the research has shown is that it's all to do with, it's these three things coming together of elephants, water,
Didn't see that one coming, did you?
No, why would you? Yeah. It's amazing that, and so basically,
elephants, water, and stone. Yeah,
yes,
I talked over
the Holy Trinity. Yeah. So basically, this rocky outcrop was on an elephant migration route. Now, obviously, if you can bring down an elephant, you are going to feed your family and your tribe very well, thank you very much. And it seems that was the driving factor here, that because it was on a migration route, that they were making stone tools here because they're adjacent, so they can butcher their prey on site. Now, what makes this interesting is that people continue to use the same site and not the others. So they still weren't making tools at the other sites. They continued to use this site for thousands upon thousands of years. Don't know how many generations. Now, at what point?
But the point is, after the elephants have disappeared, after those migration routes have become irrelevant. And it's not only using the site, but it's bringing offerings to the site. Depositions are being made at the site. So, so getting their tools probably still from that site and not from the others. but also honouring this site in some kind of special way. Boom, now the title probably makes sense as far as places of pilgrimage is concerned. And if anybody knows how to turn off all the stuff I've activated in my video stream, let me know. I'm on Apple. Apologies.
For those of you who are only listening, every time Mike sticks his fingers up or does something, then his machine bursts into confetti or fireworks or balloons or Lord knows what. Yeah. And I sit here trying not to giggle, but there's a celebration going on in Mike's studio.
Well, I just wave my hands about too much, obviously. That's...
But the thing about this, it's so profoundly fascinating because how many times in relation to prehistory and archaeology, how many times have we talked about artifacts that appear to have been sacred because they came from specific places? Now, whether it was because they came from the high mountains or it doesn't matter. Take your pick. But the point is that the original reason for something's importance could be lost in the mists of time, and it just becomes a thing that you're doing it because your ancestors did, and a site becomes sacred for we know not what reasons. And we can apply that to so many sites that we know about.
Well, I'll tell you what, Rupert, as this is the Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge podcast, why don't we sort of test it out on those two extremes, on those two bookends of what we're talking about? I've never seen that cascade of stuff before. I'm sorry about my waving my hands about. Because Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge podcast. Oh, by the way, why the Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge podcast? It's because we're making a film about Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge, telling the story of the Neolithic from Anatolia right through Europe up to the Wiltshire Plains. In a nutshell, there's a link to more about what that's about down in the description below if you fancy having a look. Sorry, back on topic. There are some we'll test it out. Little bits of thought experiment with what we know about Göbekli Tepe and see if we can. If it's just without saying that's what we believe, but just looking at Göbekli Tepe and other sites through this lens of repeated pilgrimage. And can sites take on a completely different complexion to their original purpose or original reasoning. So Göbekli Tepe, what comes up first there? Do we know? Other reasons. What's the trifecta at Göbekli Tepe that has people be there at that place? It's got to be hunting grounds, hasn't it? Yeah. It's gazelles in the gazillions. Yes. Yes, and we know that at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, we know that they were efficiently using water. So they must have managing water. That's to be more precise. Extraordinary cisterns and waterways that are doing that. The third bit of the trifecta there is the raw materials. And this stands for the Göbekli Tepe and the other Tepe sites, is they wouldn't be there if they weren't built on this particular limestone. These limestone beds, out of which it is relatively, I'm not going to say easy, but relatively easy for them to prize great slabs out of the ground that could become the T-pillars. T-pillars would not be there anywhere else in the world I can think of. But there you are. So location. It's not random. It's so dependent on the resources that are available to a site. And I mean, now Göbekli Tepe, we can say with a large degree of security, definitely is a pilgrimage site. My goodness, the numbers that go up there. When we were back in November, you think out of season, there were hordes of people going up there on what can only be termed a pilgrimage, I guess. But I don't think Göbekli Tepe is an exemplar of what we're trying to express, particularly here.
Maybe not. I don't think it's irrelevant to look at a lot of the prehistoric sites and make the point that people are still visiting them today. The actual purpose may have changed in people's minds, but nevertheless, we've still got sites of pilgrimage. And if in 10,000 years' time, people are analysing the archaeology and analysing the tourist aspect now, would they separate it completely from its purpose of however many thousand years before us? Maybe, maybe not.
Now, I have to say, in a lot of people's minds, we will have created, you'll love this pun, an elephant in the room.
Oh, Christ.
Because in many people's minds, Göbekli Tepe was already a pilgrimage site. Way back in the time that it was built, because there's this meme around it that it was hunter-gatherers, so therefore they couldn't have been settled there. They must have been coming back to this place as a temple to do whatever they had to do. So in that sense, I think in people's minds it already existed as a pilgrimage site. But as we've tried to illustrate, it had been so shoved in our faces, you and I, from our visit in November, and we've tried to express through our recording of our visit, that Göbekli Tepe was a settlement site. And the folks had got that aspect of it pretty nailed down, and the special buildings that we're so used to seeing, were special buildings. There were places that were part of a community. What they were used for by that community, we don't know. Or we can only guess, and we do, of course. But I just thought I'd better put that bit aside, because it wasn't necessarily a pilgrimage site back then.
No. And any of the Tash Tepe sites, all the other T-pillar sites, clearly this was a thriving culture back then. There's nothing, amazing as it is to us today, there was nothing inherently unique about Göbekli Tepe back in the day. When we know about the hundreds, literally, of other sites that they have found or they have pinpointed in the region, they know where they are. Whether they'll ever get excavated is another question altogether. But clearly, none of these sites were inherently unique, if you see what I mean. It's interesting, though, isn't it? It's interesting when you look at people today. So we've commented many times in the past about, so there are places that we know historically were animal pounds, and yet people today still go and tie their prayer ribbons in the shrubbery around them, because they perceive any megalithic site as somehow inherently spiritual or sacred or what have you. And how things morph over time. It's interesting how things get absorbed or reclaimed, don't they? Things get reclaimed throughout history.
I think there's better value, though, in talking about the other bookend, and that's Stonehenge, because I think there is something related to what we're talking about. And what we haven't the thing is about, it's the repeated visit, it's the imprinting on, well, this is what we do. We've forgotten why we do it, but we're still doing it. Because that's what we do, because. Well, there's no reason. We just do it. It's what is done. Anything else would be an anathema. Not do it would be an anathema, and to question it would be an anathema, because that would mean upsetting the apple cart, rocking the boat, all those kinds of things.
Well, yeah, one of the unavoidable aspects here is people wanting to do things together. because if you take Stonehenge as as the astronomical calendar that it is, you can step outside your own door and you can watch the solstice. Nobody needs to go anywhere to to view the solstice. The point is that people wanted to come together, and still do want to come together, to share this moment in time. Now, whether it was a spiritual thing, a sacred thing, or whatever, or whether it was just a time of year when people got together for whether it was feasting or whatever it might have been, the point is that it was people coming together. And that's probably what's most significant about any of these places.
Well, what I was going to suggest is that Stonehenge and the Stonehenge landscape has much more connection with the original story of the elephants, the water, and the stone than many other sites I can think of. Because thanks to the efforts of it's David Jakes, isn't it, at Blickmead, that Stonehenge doesn't begin and end with the sarsen stones on the horizon there. There's a deep history to that area, and going back into the Mesolithic, we've got incredible archaeological record of people's comings and goings at Blickmead, which is just 2 miles from, under 2 miles, something like that, from Stonehenge. And yeah, we've got this thing going on, because Blickmead, it's water, it's on the stream. I can't remember the name of the waterway that it is that passes not far from Stonehenge itself. But you've also got this whole Stonehenge landscape. It's a great hunting ground. Back then, that landscape was full of aurochs. I've stood on the side of the excavation at Blickmead and looked down into the trench where they were just revealing yet another aurochs footprint. How awesome was that? But at this same site, humans were coming as well. And the sheer scale of the lithics that were deposited at this the site, so you got this image of human beings utilizing this place, coming down to this watering place, but also being utilized by aurochs. Now, David Jakes, I don't think he's officially sort of put it forward as an hypothesis or whether he's written it down, but if you do a search on Blickmead, David Jakes, of him find him doing a lecture on YouTube, one or two of them he does mention as a sidebar this little thesis of his, this little hypothesis of his, that Stonehenge area became famous, because it was not that wooded. So you've got herds of cattle, aurochs, exposed in that area. But it was also a migration route. And it was a happy hunting ground for Mesolithic, forebears of the people that would later inhabit the Stonehenge landscape. It was just a wonderful, happy hunting ground because of the topology of the landscape. It was something special about it. It enabled people to be able to observe, muster, and guide aurochs in the landscape so that they could more easily be hunted. And if you've got a place like that draws people to it for those very reasons, and it's quite particular, aside from the landscape and the rest of England, for these particular qualities. Having the landscape right, having the not as much trees as we were led to believe once upon a time. It was still wooded, but much more sparsely than you'd think. Yeah. It was open woodland, and then couple that with the fact that we know that there were the palisade of 4 huge trunks, timber poles, found in the underneath the car park at Stonehenge, which dates to round about that time as well, and slightly after, which we suspect to do with hunting anyway, and the management of animals, something like that. So the Stonehenge landscape would become somewhere just people were coming out of habit anyway, and it would if you got that, then it's no surprise that it becomes something special. And then you got another stage where Stonehenge has nothing to do, or doesn't seem to be anything to do, with what we see in the landscape now, when it was a burial site.
Yeah.
The first iteration of beginnings of Stonehenge, as we know, it was a ditch and bank, and at least some holes in the ground, but probably some things in those holes in the ground. So more akin to an embanked stone circle than the monument that we see today. And inside that, you have burials. It was a burial site. There was a lot of it going on. And that came to an end, about 400 years later, when the Sarsens arrived, and the Bluestones, if they were already there, as it's been indicated. It looks like there was a change of use,
which in itself is not uncommon, is it? I mean, I'm sure there's quite a few sites we can think of, and Bryn Celyn on Anglesey springs to mind, of how many phases of reuse did that go through?
Yes.
New people come in, change the shape of it, change the function of it. Yeah. It seems to be what people do. I mean, we still do it today, don't we? Where we desanctify churches. Is that the word? Deconsecrate. We deconsecrate churches and turn them into buildings, apartments and all sorts. So on the outside, it looks the same. Yeah. Confuse the hell out of future archaeologists.
And who was it, and when was it, that first recognised that there's a glacial scrape in the stone just underneath the Stonehenge landscape there, which aligns with the winter solstice? I've got that right, haven't I? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. It certainly aligns with something, and that must have appeared as hugely significant to the people at the time, mustn't it?
But when was it first detected? Because now the first bit of the avenue, if you're at the Stonehenge end, the first bit of the avenue is aligned directly on that glacial scrape. Is that the right word? A glacial scrape? Apologies for the phone interference. That's somebody else. I can't do anything about that. And what was the avenue for? Was it a processionary walkway?
Now, is this another rabbit hole down which we wish to dive?
Probably not right now.
Well, we've made no bones about the fact. Oh, another bad pun. We've made no bones about the fact that we think that so much of the prehistoric, apparently sacred landscape is all to do with animal husbandry and hunting. I'm also intrigued by the notion of, so when you talk about herds of animals, that aurochs weren't necessarily herding animals, but red deer certainly are.
Yeah.
And you can imagine herds of enormous numbers going back then.
Yeah.
Directing a herd of red deer across a landscape and then driving them into a cursus where you can pick them off. That would have fed people for quite a long time. And as many stags as you get in there, you've got a whole load of tools coming out of, all those antler picks, all in one go. You never know.
Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge, it's, how many miles is it? And how many years is it?
Well, it's about 8,000 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
How many miles is it? We did calculate that, and I've forgotten.
I think it's about
it's
2,500, yeah. But that's by the by, because one of the interesting things in the gap between Göbekli Tepe and Stonehenge, apart from the time thing, is the geography. That once you leave behind, I mean, Göbekli Tepe really doesn't count as far as the beginning of the Neolithic, but that's another story. But there's no monumental building until you get, well into the Mediterranean, round about, Malta, say, and southern Spain. Megalithic work, great monuments, go out the window. People are just concerned with living their lives, it seems, as best they can. There doesn't seem to be any urge to put up great works of stone. And it's only in the latter bits of the progress of the Neolithic package across Europe that you start to get these big sites which draw all our attention and suck all the oxygen out of the air. And it's only these places really that we can talk about as being potential places of pilgrimage. What's the nearest megalithic site or place of pilgrimage that you could say people were definitely going there in the Neolithic en masse, or paying great attention to, between Anatolia, between Turkey and France, or the
well, that's a good question, isn't it? There's
Italy, maybe.
There are major sites in Armenia, for example.
Yeah. If you're going the other way, that's a different matter. If you're taking the other end of the scale and going the other end of the Fertile Crescent, the Sumerians were well into huge. But going that direction, absolutely, yes. But at Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge, we're concentrating on the westerly direction of things.
Well, obviously, you build things with what you have at your disposal.
Yeah, come back to that again. Yeah,
and I don't think we should ever lose sight of the fact that timber is generally not going to last in the archaeological record.
Yeah,
and we only have to look at some of the Chinese temples, for example, that are made entirely of wood, with no metal involved in, there's no nails or anything. It's just beautifully crafted carpentry, and where these things are slotted together and wedged together and what have you, and so stunningly beautifully carved as well, that none of that would remain in the archaeological record. There could have been amazing timber sites around the place. And
we'll
totally
never know.
Lost. No.
Very unlikely.
And we look at sites, so you take anything, you take somewhere like Pomelta in Germany, that they will call the German Stonehenge, because why wouldn't you? And we know that it was a huge site of timber posts, concentric rings of timber posts. Whether its function was anything like the same or not, we will never know.
Yeah.
But I can't really think of that many sites where huge numbers of people, where we know that they would have been congregating.
Well, I mean, the LBK, the linear band ceramic people up the Danube, they left their houses, or the remnants of their houses are well known. They're extraordinary, huge longhouses, but they don't seem to have left any monuments alongside or in that we know of.
No.
So we've got great detail about ways they were living, but nothing really in sort of organize, how they were organizing in those kinds of terms. No indications of organized religion or.
It's intriguing, isn't it?
It really, truly is. And while it's tempting, places like Capamelto, which is much later, Gossec is probably earlier, is a better example. While it's tempting to see them as ceremonial sites, it's not a given.
No, it really
not a
isn't.
given.
It really isn't. It's a really curious thing, isn't it? I don't know if we're going off on one here, but it's a really curious thing that if you go further east, that you have all the signs of houses and no signs of ceremonial building, and you come to Britain and you have every sign of ceremonial building, and hardly any signs of daily life whatsoever.
That's right.
It's a curious thing, but yeah.
Another place en route is Crete, and this way of looking at stuff does pose an interesting question about Crete, because Crete has the earliest record of farming outside of Anatolia, apart maybe from Cyprus, that there is. But they only found the evidence of the earliest farming when they were actually digging deep down underneath the courtyard of Knossos. So you're thinking, well, is that a coincidence? Or is that sort of consequential? Is that completely accidental that earliest farming was found while they happened to be digging down at Knossos? Or is it to be expected because the earliest signs were at this special place and it stayed a special place all through the Neolithic and the Bronze Age up until the building of the Great Palace? And
well, it is that old thing, isn't it? That and we've said it 100 times. That successful settlements don't disappear; they just get bigger over time. Yeah. And if you have everything that you need, then why would you move? Particularly when we know that all the farming that we know of, all the roots of farming that we know of, as it spread west, we know that the earliest farmers were based in Greece, really predominantly.
Yeah.
So yes, why would it not be under Knossos?
Going back to the original premise, though, this application of imprinting, of people forgetting while they why they were going places, or what the purpose of going to a place or honouring a place is. I don't think it's universally by any means applicable, but it's just a useful perspective to look at things, because it reveals other things underneath the surface, which aren't necessarily to do with human beings getting imprinted with the idea of stuff. Oh, I tell you what, you didn't mention, that's the experiment which you can see. I'll put a link in the description below, which is a link to the experiment in imprinting that was done. It's
the
on
conformity
video.
Experiment, yes.
Yeah, the waiting room experiment thing. Yeah, just describe that briefly.
It's a fascinating thing. It's a piece of research that's been repeated a number of times, and there is a link you can follow. It's in itself, I've got to be honest, it's not the best example of the experiment that there is, but it's the only one that we could readily find. Basically what happened in this research was you had a waiting room full of people. And so I'm talking about the original research. There were fewer people involved in the second one. But there was a waiting room full of people, all of whom were primed this was a game that we were playing. And then a new person would come into the waiting room, and this new person knows nothing about what is about to happen. And then a buzzer will sound, and everybody stands up. And a buzzer will sound again, and everybody sits down. And this new person looks around the room thinking that everybody is completely bonkers. But then a minute goes by and the buzzer goes off and everybody stands up. Buzzer goes off, everybody sits down, and the person clearly thinks that everybody is totally crazy. But the third time, they just do it as well because everybody else is doing it. They're feeling uncomfortable now that they're the only person who isn't doing it. So they start to do it as well. And then what happens is one by one, somebody will come in and call a person out as if, it's time for their appointment. And a new person will come in. And the buzzing will continue and people will stand up and sit down. And this carries on as people are taken out of the room and a new person comes in. It carries on until all the stooges are now gone and all the people in the waiting room are the people who came in knowing nothing about the game. But the buzzer goes off and everybody stands up and the buzzer goes off and everybody sits down. And it's just people continue to perform this bizarre act just because the original people had done it, because now they feel that this is what they must do. And it's an extraordinary illustration of how humans are hardwired really to conform to the status quo and the people around them. And it does make you wonder, doesn't it? When you look at whether it's a cairn on a hilltop, where a walker was there and they put a couple of bits of stone down, and then everybody else who's come along does the same thing until you're left with a significant sized cairn that anybody travelling up there would think that this was a demarcation of something significant. Something must have happened on this spot. But no, it's just people sharing.
Yeah, people doing what they do. And, feed into that, imprinting. There's an evolutionary advantage to that, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. We thrive in coming together.
Yeah.
Except when we set out to kill each other. We're very good at that too.
But it's often the imprinting that causes us to knock seven bells out of each other, isn't it?
Painfully true.
Your imprint is different to my imprint, yes.
Yes. Yes.
So where else can we apply this to anyway? I'll tell you what, we used the word pilgrimage, didn't we? Because you're very keen. Oh, I am too. But the opportunity has arisen to go to Grime's graves in wherever it is. Where is it? Is Grime's graves Cambridgeshire?
Norfolk.
Norfolk. It is Norfolk. Okay. So could we describe what we're doing? Because we want to go and make a film there of some sort. Is it? Could you describe what we're going to do as pilgrimage? Grime's
graves. It could be a pilgrimage. I've wanted to go there for a very, very, very long time, and have never managed it just because it's just the wrong place.
We should say what Grime's graves is.
Grime's graves is basically it's flint mines. It's good quality flint too, and the nodules from Grime's graves were obviously of a sufficient size and quality that they have been found all over the place. And in fact, it's not that many years ago. Is it only a couple of years ago that a nodule of flint from Grimes was found was it in Wiltshire?
Yes, and it's near the West Kennet palisaded enclosures just down the road from Avebury.
And the thing is that clearly the volume of flint here and the quality of it was sufficiently highly prized that people were mining here for a long time. And you can still, you can visit this bizarre landscape, this cratered landscape where people have been extracting flints. And the older galleries going deep into the ground as well. They were mining there. I don't actually know offhand how long they were quarrying there and mining, but it's a long time.
Yeah.
And the thing about Grimes, apart from the fact that it would be a pilgrimage for me, one of the interesting finds at Grimes' graves is they found a green stone axe there, and the green stone came from Cornwall. And that raises all manner of questions as well. Is it that greenstone, being a highly prized stone and a much higher value stone than flint, so did this person bring a greenstone flint axe to Grime's graves to trade it for large numbers of flint nodules? Don't know. Absolutely no way of knowing. Or did they bring it and leave it there on their own pilgrimage because Grime's graves was an important place to visit? How would we know?
Yeah. Actually, another interesting fact about Grime's graves that kind of feeds into what we're talking about. I don't know if you talked with Jennifer directly, but I remember talking with Jennifer Wexler. I think it was when I was at the Archaeology Institute place. And she was saying that the latest research at Grime's graves tells us that they weren't making life easy for themselves at Grime's graves. They could, and they knew where the flint was. They could have gone in from a different place, in a different angle, and not had to do anywhere near so much work to extract the flint they were getting out of there. So there seems to have been either a kind of imposed, they were creating flint of more value because it took more effort to get it out of the ground. Either that, or there was another kind of imprinting going on. Is no, we get flint by doing it the hard way.
Yes,
going on. So there's an anomaly there. It's an anomalous.
Do you know what? It's never really struck me before, but you describing it like that makes me think of. You look at the situation we had in Britain in the coal mining communities, going back over the last couple of 100 years, and certainly, even into last century, before we closed down most of the mines, that there was this attitude of your grandfather was a miner, I've been a miner, you're damn well going to be a miner, and even when children did not want to go down the mine, they were, if you like, emotionally blackmailed into you will continue the family tradition. And who knows? I mean, maybe that was a thing as well.
Who knows? Human beings, there's no accounting for them.
There is no accounting for it. We're a weird bunch, really.
And we haven't even talked about Mont, Viso, Langdale, and the Cumbrian circles. All sorts of stuff potentially going on there about habit and repeatability of stuff. However, I think for the moment I've got nothing to add to the conversation, is what I'm trying to say at this particular moment. I don't think.
The only thing I could add to the conversation would take us off on a tangent.
Let's not do that.
Speaking for another hour.
Let's not do that.
Maybe let's save that for another time.
Yeah, I think so. But I just hope the last 40 minutes or so has just opened up another perspective on ways of looking at things, and hopefully it'll throw a new light on. Maybe you've got a favourite monumental site or stone circle or something, and maybe putting this query upon it could open stuff up. Yeah, we could talk about Dartmoor. We could talk about Stone Rows. We could talk about the stone circles on Dartmoor. What they were for, etc. And what sort of rhythms of behaviour, patterns of behaviour they may have set up in people. That echo down the ages. Who knows? Who does know? I don't think we do, but I hope you'll forgive us. As I said before, folks, if I hadn't said it before, do like and subscribe, and pay a visit to our Buy Me a Coffee page and our Patreon page. See if you'd like to find a way of supporting what we're up to in different ways. And on that note, I think it's time for me to say a bye-bye from me.
And a bye-bye from me. Thanks again. See you soon.
Bye-bye.